Hey there, in this video we're going to look at something called the discriminant, a part of the quadratic formula that you can use to decide how many solutions a quadratic equation is going to have. Let's look at that right now. All right, we're going to consider three different quadratic equations here that look very similar, but we're going to use these to think about the different possibilities for a number of solutions that you can have. I'm going to go through and find, with the quadratic formula, the solution to each of these three, and we'll see what result we get in each case here. Now, before I do that one, I'll go back and do the second one before I finish. And the third one. All right, we have three different cases there. What we're going to focus on here is something called the discriminant, which is the value underneath the square root sign. Because if we figure out how many solutions we have in each case here, for the first one, we work that out, we'd get negative 6 plus or minus square root of 16 is 4 over 2. Negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. Or negative 6 minus 4 is negative 10 over 2, which is negative 5. That has two solutions here. The middle one, if we work this out, negative 6 plus or minus square root of 0 is just 0. Plus or minus 0 doesn't change anything. Negative 6 plus 0 is negative 6, divided by 2 is negative 3. Negative 6 minus 0 is negative 6, divided by 2 is negative 3. These are the same. So really, it only has one solution there. And then the last one, negative 6 plus square root of negative 4. The square root of negative 4 is undefined. There is no square root of negative 4 in the real numbers. So this actually has no solution. If you get a negative underneath there, there is no solution to that. This equation here has no solution. There's no value that works for that equation. There's one value that works for this equation, and it's negative 3. You can put it in a check. And there's two values that work for that equation. So depending on depending on the parameters in the standard form equation, it can affect how many solutions the thing has. And the key is going to be looking at that value under the square root sign. That thing under the square root sign, in each case, whether it is positive, means you're going to end up with plus or minus a certain number. You're going to end up with two different solutions. This is positive underneath there. The second case here, this value under the square root sign is 0. That's going to turn out to be one solution, because plus or minus 0 doesn't make two different numbers. And then lastly here, that value, the fact that it's negative underneath the square root sign, means you're going to have no solutions, because that is undefined, makes the whole expression undefined. So if we're going to summarize this here, let's write this down below here. It's called the discriminant. It's the expression underneath that square root sign. It's b squared minus 4ac. I'm actually going to use a letter to represent that, D for discriminant, so I don't have to keep rewriting the whole expression. If D, the discriminant, is positive, greater than 0, like what we had up here, if that value under the square root sign is positive, it means there are two solutions. If D is equal to 0, like we had in this case, there is one solution. And if D is less than 0, if it's negative, there is 0 solutions. All right, so that value underneath the square root sign, you can check quickly to see how many solutions it has. So that's solutions to equations. How is that connected with graphs? If we were to look at the graphs of the corresponding functions. All right, so here's the graphs of those three functions, and as you can see, this first one, where we came up with two solutions algebraically, you can see that the corresponding function here has two x-intercepts. Two solutions to that equation means two x-intercepts of this corresponding function here. The second one, you can see that it just touches the axis just once here. It has one x-intercept to correspond to the one solution the equation had. Right? one x-intercept of this function means one solution of that corresponding equation equal to 0. And then the third one here, that has no solutions, and then you look at the graph and you can see why it has no solutions, because it doesn't ever cross the x-axis. This thing has no x-intercepts, the corresponding equation has no solutions. So number of solutions to the equation, you can predict with that b squared minus 4ac, and it's connected with number of x-intercepts of that function. All right, in each of these cases, the discriminant here was greater than 0, it means it had that 2 solutions. The discriminant was equal to 0, had 1 solution. Discriminant was less than 0, was negative, had no solutions. All right, that is using the discriminant, this part underneath the square root sign in the quadratic formula, to predict how many solutions a quadratic equation has, or how many x-intercepts a quadratic function has.